The Summoner might actually be the best Necromancer build in Season 4. And this is of course thanks to all the minion buffs that just happened. Let's talk about it. Starting with the skills, I want to talk about which one of our minions we choose. And for the skeletons, the warriors, I'm going to choose defenders. And the node that I use for them is the one that makes them taunt. For the mages, we have cold, and the node that I use is one that applies vulnerable. And then for the golem, I went blood because one, I love the blood golem, and two, it's very healthy for you as the necromancer. Every time you use its ability, you get healed, and then your golem is just supercharged as long as it's healthy. For the actual skills, I like to use Reap, and the rune that I use is the one that's going to create corpses for us. And then in the next tab, because we're going pure summon, we're not taking blood surge. We actually just have 3 points into hewed flesh for even more corpses. In the next tree, we of course have skeleton warrior mastery, and then 1 point into grim harvest so that we can get fueled by death, which is going to increase our damage every time we consume a corpse, regardless of how. In the tree after that, we have a good couple of passives in here, but we want to max out decrepify because the CC from this and then the damage bonus from amplified damage is massive. And the rune that I use is aberrant because it's going to reduce the cooldown on your army of the dead when we get there. Now, if I'm not mistaken, all of your minions can trigger the cooldown reduction on this. Now, for the rest of the passives here, we have Skeleton Mage Mastery, that's just going to increase the damage and life that they do. We have Death's Approach, which is going to give us more movement speed, which the Necro severely lacks. And the top one up here is Death's Embrace. You deal more damage and you take less damage from close enemies. We'll get into that in a second. You do get very close in combat. I have one throwaway point in Gruesome Mending just so that we can get healed a little bit more from sources. You can actually put this one wherever the hell you want, so just ignore that for now. And we definitely have 1 point into Corpse Tendrils, and then the rune that we're going for is Plagued because that's also going to apply vulnerable to everything that you hit with it. And Corpse Tendrils is just an amazing CC option, and it doesn't consume a corpse. We have 3 into Necrotic Carapace because every time a corpse is formed, everybody gets to fortify. And then Reaper's Pursuit is awesome because Acolyte's Reap counts as a darkness skill, so you get the movement speed from this always. Now for the ultimate tree, we go Army of the Dead, which I think is one of my favorite skills in all of Diablo 4. And then for some of the passives, we have 3 into Golem Mastery, which is going to buff the living hell out of those. 3 into Inspiring Leader, which while we're healthy, everybody gains an enormous amount of critical strike chance. 3 into Hellbent Commander. Now this is huge because you're using Reap, you're actually up in combat pretty often, so all of your minions that are around you are going to gain an assload of bonus damage from that. And then Death's Defense is just going to make our minions that much tankier, which is pretty important. And then for the key passive, we're going to use Kalin's Edict. I think I'm saying that right, but it's going to give all of your minions increased attack speed for every other minion that exists. Now for the aspects on this one, the main one you want to get as early as possible is Reanimation because that's going to give you a ton more damage to your minions. Unyielding Commander is another one that you want to go for, and that's going to supercharge all of your minions for the 7 seconds after you use Army of the Dead. And then Occult Dominion, of course, if you're lucky enough to find it early on, is going to give you more skeletons. For the defenses on this one, surprisingly, you can use Might if you want to because you are using one of your basic skills, but Hardened Bones is one that's going to give you a high percentage of damage reduction just right off the bat. Now for the stats on this one, since things have changed in Season 4, it's a little easier to understand what stats you need to get. A lot of the things are consolidated and better for the general consumer. But with this build, you want crit chance, vuln damage, and attack speed. All of these benefit your minions, I think, by 100% right now. Ask Macro Bioboy just to clarify on that one, but that's what I think it is. And then for the defensive stats, just like almost everything else, we want cooldown reduction, armor, resistances, and life. Now for the Paragon board, I love using max roll as a guide or as a guideline at the very least for this. You can change any of these points however you want, but this is how they're displaying the Necromancer and the Summon variant. At the start, we have the Amplify Glyph, and this is going to give us more damage, and it's going to cause things to deal more damage to cursed enemies. On the Cult Leader board, we obviously go with Cult Leader, and then the glyph that we're going to use here is Dead Razor, and Dead Razor is going to give you up to 15% more damage just depending on how long the target even lives, so this is pretty good for bosses. North of that, we have the Bone Graft board with the Essence Glyph, and that's going to give us an assload more to our critical strike damage, and keep in mind the crit chance on this build is pretty high. To the right of Cult Leader, we have Hulking Monstrosity with the Golem Glyph, and I know this is going to be a surprise to you, but it's going to increase the amount of damage your Golem does. Shocking, I know. North of that, we have Flesh Eater with the Cope Real Glyph, and this is going to give you all resistances, which is nice, but it's actually going to give you a lot more run speed based on how many minions you have. So between this and the couple other passives from the skill tree, we actually are sitting at like, I think 40 or 50% run speed just innately, which is fantastic with the Necromancer. To the right of that, we have Scent of Death with the Exploit Glyph, and Exploit is going to be more of our vulnerable damage. And finally, on the Wither board, we have the Territorial Glyph, and this goes hand in hand with all of the damage to close enemies and buffs to your close minions that you get. And I've said this a million times, you can do whatever the hell you want to do when it comes to the Paragon board. This is just what I'm using to showcase this build. And I know some of you have heard that before from the D2 days. For the end game gear, really the only things that you need are aspects. There's not really any uniques that you use for this one. Previously, you would use the Ring of Mendeln as it added that nice AoE thing. And honestly, you can still use that if you find it early enough. It's replaced by end game stats on your 2 legendary aspects on your rings. And then of course there's Shaco, but that doesn't even count. Most of us won't even see that in a single season, so ignore that. Now the playstyle for this one is generally super laid back. You see what I did there? You curse things, you buff your minions, you use your ultimate to supercharge your minions, and then whenever it's off cooldown, you can use tendrils again to just clump enemies and add vulnerable to anything that just doesn't have it on it right now. But this is a very good build that you can play and watch a movie with at the same time or anything like that. It's super laid back. It's very, very, very easy. Now, objectively, this build does clear AoE content just as fast as all the others, but it really fucking shines when it comes to bosses. I think this was the fastest boss killer I've tested so far out of like the 30 plus builds that I did on the PTR. I mean, it literally killed one of the bosses in I think 4 seconds, which is ridiculous. However, on the pit clapometer, it did put up an acceptable 4 minutes and 30 seconds, putting it just below the middle of the pack so far. But that's just because it's not over the top or outrageously good at clearing out the whole dungeon. It really shines on the bosses. Now, in my opinion, I've always loved the Summon Necromancer. That's been one of my builds since day one of even in Diablo 2 or Diablo Hellfire back in the day. And so seeing it finally come to life this hardcore in season 4 just makes me so happy about this. Now, when it comes to the rating on this one, I'm going to try to give it a super unbiased 9.1 out of 10. My question to you is, what are you playing this season in Diablo 4? You'll have to let me know in the comments down below, and on your way down there, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel because they're free and they really help us out here. And if you want, you can catch us live. We try to stream at least once a week here on YouTube, and we are planning a good amount of giveaways and things like that this season, since now you can kind of trade everything. The best way to stay up to date on what's going on in the Noodle realm is to join our Discord and pay attention to the announcements tab in there. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video, and if you're bored, YouTube is going to recommend this next one for you. Happy grinding, travelers, and we'll see you in Sanctuary.